Director of NSIP.
Thank you, Swati. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our June TA call. We conduct this call every year just prior to us issuing our SPP APR responses and our Section 616 IDEA determinations. I'm assuming that a number of you have been through this process before, but there may be others who are new, or even for those of you who are experienced, it's always good to have a refresher. And as we will be pointing out this year, I guess I don't have to really explain to you, this year has been a little different because of COVID, and that's impacting everything, including the way we go about analyzing your responses. So we'll be talking a little bit about those unique circumstances today. On the call with me today are Jennifer Wolfsheimer and Christine Pilgrim, who are leading our SPP APR determination efforts. Before we get started with that part of the call, I wanted to remind you that you should have received the fiscal year 2021 grantee satisfaction survey. I sent a message about that, but wanted to just take a moment today to follow up. On Tuesday, you should have gotten a message that was titled, that was titled Department of Education Grantee Satisfaction Survey, and the sender was the CFI Group on behalf of the Department of Education. This is the contractor that we use to do our annual grantee satisfaction survey. The survey shouldn't take you too long. We think maybe 15, 20 minutes. It will ask you about your experience as a grant recipient of the IDEA Formula Grant Program. And we will be using those results to assess where we're doing well as areas where we could improve. If you haven't received it, you might want to check your spam folder or junk email folder just to make sure that it didn't get routed there mistakenly. If you still can't find it, please you can contact me, or you can contact Tara Corshane at the department, and her name is tara.courchane@ed.gov. And she should be able to assist you with getting a copy of your survey. While the survey is voluntary, we count on everyone's participation in order to receive representative data that helps us to identify how to best serve you. So we really do encourage you to do this. I know you're probably inundated with requests to provide survey responses, but we do hope that you prioritize this one because it is used by us on an annual basis to gauge how we're serving you as our grantees. We appreciate your time and feedback that we'll be getting. So with that, then I'm going to turn over our call to Jennifer Wolfsheimer.
Thank you, Greg. And this slide is just a little bit about what Greg just presented related to the survey.
And there's Tara's email, correct spelling of her last name and email if you didn't get it from my verbal description.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So, thank you all for joining the call today. We're currently completing OSEP's responses to the FFY19 SPP APR submissions and finalizing our annual determinations, as Greg mentioned earlier. As we do each year, we want to share with you some important information prior to issuing determinations. So today's call, we will review our timeline, describe each of the documents that you'll find posted in the EMAPS SPP APR reporting tool, and discuss what we will what will occur after determinations are issued. This call should probably take around 20-25 minutes, and we will have time for questions at the end. Next slide. So first we will discuss the OSEP and what to expect. Next slide. So in terms of what to expect regarding the OSEP between August and January, our engagement will include sharing our analysis of your submission through feedback calls, as we have done previously. Feedback will be around any concerns we had in areas where we see opportunity for improvement. We also look forward to hearing updates on the status of the work to implement the OSEP. And finally, with the new SPP APR inclusive of all indicators, as a reminder, the OSEP will be due on February 1, 2022. So we will be providing TA specific to the FFY 2020 to 2025 package. Next slide. For the August TA call, you can expect that we will focus on the OSEP and the incredible resources, tools developed by our TA centers to support your work. Our centers are well poised to support you as you prepare for the 2022 submission. We will be updating any relevant tools and resources as well. Next slide. So now onto the 2021 determinations and what you can expect. Next slide, please. Determinations will be issued on June 22nd for Part C and June 24th for Part B. OSEP has a series of rigorous quality controls that are currently being undertaken before issuing determinations. As was the case last year, Greg will send an email to the chief state school officers and lead agency directors indicating that the system is open and that determination letters can be viewed. In addition, PSC will also send out an email broadcast to all users indicating that the system is open, and that is similar to last year. Next slide, please. So in the EMATS SPP APR tool, states will be able to view the final OSEP responses and required actions as applicable for each indicator. One change from in previous years is that, I'm sorry, there's so much background noise. One change from in previous years is that actions that states are required to take will now only be covered in the required action section. Before, you could find them in both the OSEP response and the required action. Again, this year they will only be in the required action. However, it's incredibly important for you to review the OSEP response and the required action, as well as for every indicator, as well as the introduction. Additionally, for all programs, the attachments you will find in EMAPS will be the RDA matrix that is individualized for each state, and that will include the state's determination, the RDA percentage is based on both compliance scores and result scores. For Part B and Part C states, this percentage is 50% result and 50% compliance. For entities, it would be 60% compliance and 40% results. Scoring on compliance indicators and other compliance factors. and scoring on results indicators and other results factors. The data rubric that shows how the OSEP calculated the timely and accurate state reported data score in the compliance matrix. And then as well as your state determination letter and how we made determinations document, or how the department made determinations document, which is often called the HTDMD document. And that provides a detailed description of how we make determinations, and will answer essentially probably 80 to 90% of your questions related to how we make determinations. The last document that I want to highlight is the dispute resolution data from 2019 to 2020 for this FFY 2019 SPP APR, which includes the IDA section 618 data that OSEP used to calculate the timely state complaint decisions and the timely due process hearing decisions, which are in the compliance matrix. And now I'm going to turn it over to Christine.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I am sure that Jennifer was only too happy to pass it over to me. I would say that during this time, I was laughing hysterically at some point because, you know, it's one of these days where you're like, okay, I'm grateful that my colleagues have extended grace to me, but also hoping that the 225 participants on the phone extend grace to Jennifer and I. So in addition to being steeped in SPP APR reviews, like 2 minutes before the call started, I had technical difficulties. Poor Greg and Jennifer, like, Christine, where are you? Are you joining? What's happening? My 16-year-old had her wisdom teeth out today, and she's been up and down the house, won't keep quiet, sedated. I've locked myself in a room. Hopefully she's not going to barge in here and, you know, mouth something about how she has to spit or something like that, which is what she did earlier when I was talking to my supervisor, Greg Core. So nonetheless, here we are with you to chat about determinations, and I have the last few slides. So Swati, can you go to the next one? And Jennifer, I'm sure that the lawnmowers are done right now. Like, they're finished all their stuff the second you stop talking.
Exactly, they just packed up.
Of course, because that's our life. So I wanted to chat a little bit about ICC forms. So we considered the challenges that programs have experienced trying to make these forms compliant. I mean, we've heard you loud and clear. I think through this year's submission and last, there have been lots of issues with ICC forms not trying with them not being compliant, despite your greatest efforts on your end, especially after you add a signature. So to ensure that all programs have the same information posted on the IDA website, we're going to change our practice of publicly posting the ICC form. So what will happen in your OSEP response this year in the introduction is that there's going to be language acknowledging receipt of the form, but we will not post them publicly because with some folks having it compliant, a vast majority not being able to make it compliant, we want to make sure that what is posted is consistent across the board. So we're going to do that starting this year. Next slide, please. So a little bit about determinations and the COVID impact. So you would remember that last October when we issued the memo, the instructions, and the measurement table to sort of guide this year's submission, we requested that all states and entities include narrative under each impacted indicator, talking about the impact of COVID on your ability to collect and report valid and reliable data, if it affected the completeness of the data and the steps you took to mitigate that impact. We really wanted to convey to you how much we appreciate the level of transparency we saw across all 116 submissions regarding the impact of COVID on the data you reported this year. So in making determination decisions for 2021, OSEP considered all of the information that was submitted that related to the impact of the COVID pandemic. And for 2021 determinations, no state or entity received a determination of needs intervention due solely to the data impacted by COVID-19. I think Jennifer and I, when we had the call, when we first issued the package last fall, and we talked about the importance of giving us this information, and I'm pretty sure that we shared then that that would allow us to have a holistic view of the impact of COVID on your data, and then we would be able to make very informed decisions as we think about determinations and how we support you moving forward. So in terms of determination letters, each state's letter will include specific language as appropriate regarding the impact of COVID on your data collection and reported, any of those factors that we considered when making determinations. Another item of note as you're looking at your OSEP response is we included language if a state had no data for an indicator because of COVID. So for Part B programs, you would see that in indicator 3 because no states administered statewide assessments. For those of you whose OSEP, you measure your SIMR using a statewide assessment, you would see similar languages there as well. That acknowledgement in the OSEP response, so there was no data because of COVID. Similarly, if the validity and reliability of your data was impacted by COVID, we acknowledge that in OSEP response, and you were not penalized in the 616 scoring of the rubric. An example of this that I can think of is some states not having exit data for outcomes. So if it wasn't a COVID year, we never experienced COVID and you didn't have any exit data for outcomes, we would call into question the validity and reliability of your data. However, based on the impact of COVID, we made sure that we did not penalize you in the data rubric for that. So Wati, you can go to the next slide, please. And then finally, in the coming weeks, we may have to ask you to extend grace in the coming weeks. You know, we might have to stretch that out weeks. The state's final documents will be posted on the IDEA website. So this will include the final DocX, your state's determination letter, and any related OSEP attachments. We will send out notification when those documents are live. You should expect to hear from your OSEP state lead about scheduling a follow-up call to discuss determinations and answer any questions you may have related to OSEP's analysis. Separately, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, over the next few months, when we mapped out that timeline, we'll be reaching out to you to provide feedback related to the OSEP submissions. And that's it in terms of updates or just sort of laying out the process for you. For those who are new, this might be the first time you're sort of entrenched in how this works. Those of you that are seasoned and been with us quite some time, it's sort of similar to what we've done in past years, albeit COVID. And Swati, I don't know if we have any questions yet anywhere.
We don't have any questions in the Q&A box. Just a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, you can click the Q&A option in your control panel, or you could also raise your hand and we can unmute you. We do have a few comments from Kat Taminga. Says that they love your humanity and humor OSEP team. So good for all of us to see and hear. And thank you for the COVID grace. Hopefully you can hear the collective sigh from states, territories, and BIE.
I appreciate your grace as well. And if you ever want some humor, we are a pretty funny team over here. So.
Great. All right, we just had 2 questions come in. So from Barbara McGowan, when will states receive guidance on how to allocate IDEA ARP funds? Will it be based 85% on relative population and 15% on poverty?
I
only feel equipped to answer data questions. Greg?
I am muting myself inartfully, but there we go. We finally got it done. Okay, so we have an ARP fact sheet that is in clearance right now. Has to go through various levels in the department as well as the Office of Management and Budget. It will respond to a number of questions, including ones like you just posed, but we're expecting that will come out around, they're saying around June 21st. But you would, for your LEAs, I'm assuming your question is about your LEAs, you would allocate the funds in the same way that you would the standard IDEA allocations. you don't make a distinction. So you would take the entire amount and then allocate it as you have in the past. Looks like,
Sorry, I can also see some of these questions, and I think some of them I can lump together. Is that okay?
Yeah, totally.
I think lumping is permissible.
It seems to be there are at least two questions around how we factored in assessment data, since there are no statewide assessments. So sort of how did we deal with that in determinations? And for the handful of states that have ever had catastrophic technical issues and got a waiver from the department in terms of administering a statewide assessment would know, because I can think of one or two states that have experienced that in the past. It's just an NA on your RDA matrix. So participation on statewide assessments was not factored into the calculation. So there is that. Let's see, I think there was also another one about more details about how determinations were made, or do we have to wait for the standard letter? So the response to that question is waiting for the how the department made determinations document, as well as information that's in the letter. We did not change the way we made determinations in terms of the information in that document and how we assign cut scores and those kinds of things. What is different is in cases where there was no data because of COVID, we held a state harmless because of that. So it was not factored into calculation in to come up with an RDA percentage. For states that had data, no data, which would typically be dinged in a multitude of places as we are making determinations, did not do that. But you'll see it all in the how the department made determinations. And for states who, when we calculated, ran the numbers in the database and it sort of spits out based on where you are, what the determination is. If the factors that led to a state ending up in that bucket were solely because of COVID, we took a look at that, and no state ended up in that bucket solely because of COVID. But for those states, you'll see that information in your letter, very well detailed. I think there's a cute little lawn companies thing with a smiley face, some more art fun questions, Greg.
Yeah, more art questions. Yeah, so the IDEA funds in the American Rescue Plan were added very late in the process. They are targeted to IDEA, so there were specific amounts for both the 611 program, that was 2.58 billion, 250 million for Part C, and 200 million for 619. For Part B, which is I think where this question is going, you take the total amounts allocated both through your standard 2021 allocation plus the ARP funds. And there's not a need to allocate those separately to your districts. So if you have more specific questions, please follow up with your state lead.
Great. We had a question just come in asking if Jennifer could review again where OSEP comments and responses and required actions will be found in the APR.
Yeah, that was probably the height of the lawn company noise. So the required actions will be in the required actions section of the EMAPS tool response. So in previous years, the OSEP response had also addressed required actions in relation to the correction of non-compliance. This year, due to the reporting tool and the way it rolls over from year to year, we moved all of that into the required actions. So the emphasis is really just so that you can see all required actions and what the state must do for the next year should be in that and will be rolled over in the next year. So it's not saying that you should ignore what's in the OSEP response. It's just telling you to focus on the one piece as far as what's required, and this will be also highlighted in the determination letter as well.
Thank you. A question from Vicki Graham. Should states collect a separate application and budget from LEAs for ARP funds?
I don't think so. We can double check on that, but my understanding is that a single application is sufficient. I'll try to do some quick checking right now. Other questions?
I think you guys got to Kara Waldron's question already about 2021 state determinations data.
Yes, that was in Christine's initial response.
All
Yeah.
right.
Tied to participation on assessments.
And Michelle's about indicator 3 getting accounted for.
Similarly, it'll be NA in the RDA matrix, and that element wasn't included in the calculation.
Great. All right. I don't see any other questions or any hands raised. Give it a minute if Greg, were you able to check up on that?
Yeah, I don't know that I'll be able to get an answer before the call's ending. Checking with someone right now, but I have not gotten a response yet.
All right, thank you. One question did come in from Robin Palacios. Will all states and territories receive ARP funds?
Yes.
And another one saying that, asking, will NAEP be in the determinations matrix?
Yes, NAPE is in this year's determination matrix. You know that as has been our practice, NAPE is one of the results elements that we have considered, and that is there for 2 years because NAPE is only administered every 2 years. Sure, someone will then ask me what's going to happen next year because there was no NAPE administered in 2021. And here's where I'm going to say, continue to extend grace. We're well aware of that sort of implication, and we'll continue to have discussions moving forward. I think we recognize that while this year's submission, it was 3 months worth of sort of a COVID impact to your data. In next year's submission with the new package and a different timeline for your OSEP, it has been an entire fiscal year of you wrangling with the pandemic, and we do recognize that that's the case. So just know that to the extent that you're able to continue being transparent and sharing information with us about the impact of COVID on how you collect and report data, all of that information is helpful to us as we make decisions.
Great, thank you. Another question from Danielle Howes. Does the section 3 of the grant app for the ARP funds have to be only the portion we intend to expand in FFY 21 or for the full ARP allocation?
I'm not going to try to answer that because I haven't thought about that. I assumed it would be for the full ARP allocation, but I don't want to give an incorrect answer. So we will follow up on that. Also on the question about separate allocations for LEAs, we do know that from the federal level, as we issue the ARP funds to the states, that there will be separate GANs, grant award notifications going out. What I don't know is how that rolls down to the state level, so we will follow up on that question as well. I'm sorry, this call wasn't really intended to cover ARP funds, or we would have had folks who were a little more knowledgeable about it than I am as part of the call. But we will take your questions and follow up.
Yeah, and Emily White, in relation to that, said that she really appreciates your transparency and thanks you for being earnest and saying that you have to check on something instead of shooting from the hip. So,
well,
very appreciated.
With 200 plus people on the call, we don't want to provide incorrect information.
Yeah. So the next question is to confirm that they heard correctly. IDEA and IDEA ARP can be combined and set as one and sent as one grant for 611 and 619.
And that's what I'm checking on right now. So we will give you a more definitive answer on that as quickly as possible.
Great. And another question, in the allocation table, the territories did not have money in the ARP column. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, but it's I understand that it was for the territories, and I don't know the reason why, it was combined with their regular allocation. I don't understand exactly why they were treated differently, but they are recipients of ARP funds.
Right. Another question, it was asking why Department of the Interior is not receiving any Part B funds.
I wasn't aware that they're not.
So knowing that my division director, I'm sure, is frantically trying to text, email folks to try to get all of the answers to these questions in real time. I can think of other TA calls where we've had to follow up with the entire participant list with answers to the questions. So I'm wondering if we could give a few more minutes in case folks want to add questions, but recognizing that we commit to following up with everyone broadly with responses to these as soon as we can. Because Greg, I know that you are over there trying to make magic work on all your answers quickly. So
no, I don't want to mislead folks. We're not going to be able to answer this today, but we have our physical staff who are listening to the questions and composing a responsive email right now, which we hope to get out probably not this week, but maybe early next week.
Great. Yeah, and again, more appreciation for your honesty and transparency. So I don't see any other questions that have come in. We can give it a few more minutes if anyone has anything else they'd like to ask. And there's no hands.
People extending a lot of grace to us this afternoon.
All right, so there's one question saying that they may have this wrong, but it looked like they had $0 in the table. But after your answer about how ARP funds were allocated within regular funds for the ARP, that is likely what is showing on the tables for the Department of the Interior. So thank you.
Okay. All right, we can follow up separately on that question.
All right.
If you have more questions about either the SPP APR response, the determinations, or the ARP funds, please, you can send those to me and we will add those to the list and get responses out to you. My email address is gregg@ed.gov. That's GREGG. Be sure you add the second G. ed.corr, at ed.gov. Okay, so Jennifer and Christine, you think we're ready to wrap it up here?
Yes, thank you, Greg.
Okay.
Yes, thank
Well,
you.
thank you both for persevering here through glitchy applications and lawnmowers and everything else that we're
Wisdom teeth. Failure is not an
Yeah.
option, Greg.
Yeah.
Failure is
wisdom
not an
teeth.
option.
That's our motto these days. Failure is
It
not
is.
an option.
That's so true.
So thanks everyone for participating in today's call. And thank you for your questions, both those we could answer as well as those we're going to have to work on a little bit before we provide responses. I want to wish everybody a great afternoon, and we will be talking to you soon.